Hi, in this video, I'm going to walk through the process of interpreting and analyzing the C Major fugue from Bach's solo sonata BWV 1005. Analysis only gets you so far in terms of learning and eventually performing this piece, but it does help in terms of giving a sense of the overall structure of the piece, which might then inform your interpretation in terms of questions of phrasing, dynamic, voicing, and overall hierarchy. I hope that this video will equip you with ways to ask interpretive questions about this piece, which you can then answer in your own individual ways. So this fugue, as I said, comes from Bach's C Major solo violin sonata. It's the longest movement in the cycle of sonatas and partitas for solo violin, only matched in terms of scale by the chaconne. The first thing I would do in terms of interpreting this fugue would be to identify all the statements of the subject. Here, the blue arrows mark the subject's appearances throughout the first half page of the fugue. Then you might identify all the statements of the counter subject. These red arrows point to the counter subject, which is a descending chromatic scale. Once you've identified the full statements of the subject, you might start to notice what happens elsewhere. These red brackets indicate material that abstracts the fugal subject, what you might call a codetta section. In this first bracket, for example, the falling eighth note figure from the subject becomes fragmented and repeated. In this second bracket, the same sequence gives way to a freer elaboration of the subject. So one interpretive question might be, how do you distinguish for the listener between the subject's statements and these codetta sections? Personally, I think of the codetta material as a little more searching, a little more fantastical, as if the music gets a little lost in its own train of thought. At the same time as going through all the subject statements and counter-subject statements and codetta materials, I would also begin to look a little bit at the macro structure of the movement. We were just looking at the beginning of the exposition, which introduces the subject material. The exposition is followed by the first episode, which is like an expanded codetta, in that it is more searching and exploratory and moves further away from the fugal subject. After the first episode, we have the stretto section, in which the subject is immediately layered on itself. Then we have the second episode. The end of the second episode marks the midway point of the fugue's binary form. The second half of the fugue is initiated by the al reverso section, in which the pitches of the fugal subject are inverted. The third episode is similarly a rough inversion of the second episode. Finally, we have the reprise, which is almost identical to the exposition. So having this structural map of the whole fugue helps you to start making more interpretive decisions about how these pieces fit together. For example, how would you distinguish your playing of the exposition from the reprise? Or how would you mark the midway point of this binary form for your listener? Or how do you distinguish between the fugal sections and the episodes? In order to begin answering these questions, let's look at a couple of symmetries and transitions in the fugue. One notable symmetry occurs between the second and third episodes. As I said before, the third episode appears as a rough inversion of the second, following an upwards trajectory as opposed to the second episode's initial descending contour. In particular, Bach inverts this descending 3-note figure, seen in the second episode, both here with the GFE and the E, D, C sharp. In the third episode, this is inverted as the C, D, E, E, F, G figure, which becomes the basis for this repeated sequence. When I play the fugue, I don't work too hard on emphasizing these figures, but I do think of them as significant origin points for what likely started as an improvisatory abstraction on the fugal subject. Indeed, these 3-note ascending and descending figures make up the fugal subject. Beyond this, they feature heavily at the end of episodes 2 and 3, in which the fugal subject coheres above a pedal point. The end of the second episode similarly states the subject over a D pedal point. I find that one of the most effective ways to convey this sense of overall structure to my listener is to focus on some key transitional points in the fugue. By doing this, I'm able to signal dramatic shifts in the formal narrative of the movement. So let's compare the transitions between the end of the second episode and the beginning of the al reverso section, and between the end of the third episode and the beginning of the reprise. As I noted earlier, the beginning of the al reverso section, in which the fugal subject is inverted, marks the midway point of the fugue's binary form. As such, when I perform this fugue, I think of the al reverso section as a kind of energetic restart. By contrast, I think of the momentum from the end of the third episode as carrying through the reprise. Since all of the music in the reprise has been introduced before, I find that moving through it maintains a heightened sense of drama and helps to keep the listener's attention to the formal unfolding of the entire fugue. Here, I'll demonstrate. So before concluding, I want to again emphasize that these are my own personal decisions in interpreting this piece. But I hope that the process of thinking through this fugue's parts and structures will help you to ask your own questions, to find your own answers, and to arrive at your own interpretation.